Hey Internet, Mike Byrne, aka Magic Man here, once again with part 3 of our How to Play Final Fantasy Trading Card Game, or FFTCG, updated series for 2025. If you've been sticking with us so far, thank you so much. Hope you've considered liking and subscribing and all that fun stuff. And of course, head on over to ReadyCheckRadio.com. That's the channel that I have where we do the Final Fantasy and Square Enix podcasts and some other streams and a bunch of fun stuff, including live locals on Monday nights starting this coming Monday. I've been doing a show, so I was a little busy and couldn't go. We'll be back on track this coming Monday night. Always welcome new players in the chat there to come and ask questions, and experienced players to just come and hang out and see what we're running, prepping for the next competitive event. So in the first two videos, we have covered an awful lot. We have gone through how to build your standard 50-card constructed deck, how to build your 8-card limit break deck, how to pay for cards and get them onto the field. We did a quick recap of the actual turn phases. That's going to be a more in-depth piece in this video. But first, we've got to set up the game to start to play. So now let's do it. All right, so you are ready to play. You've got your decks, you're ready to go. You got your limit break deck, your standard deck. Let's get to it and just hit the playing field. And I'm going to use the 10th anniversary Final Fantasy XIV mat here as the example. You'll find a lot of Final Fantasy official products have some of the zones laid out. Now, I do want to say that these aren't like hard rules as far as this is where things go on the play mat when you're playing, but this is generally the way most people play. Some might put things in slightly different places. Some might put things swapped from left to right because they're left-handed, and so that works a little more naturally for them. If something is wonky and it's making the game state hard to read, of course, you can always talk to your opponent nicely and say, hey, this is making this a bit more challenging for me to understand what's going on the field. Can we maybe make a change here? And of course, if something escalated at official events, you'll always have judges to come over. But please know that you're not going to be able to be like, hey, this is not the way the starter guide told me to set up the table and you're playing wrong. That's not the case. It's not really a hard, fast rule yet. In the official rules as far as where things go. But this is generally the makeup of the play area. On your screen in the upper right corner of the mat, that's where your standard deck goes. So after you have shuffled and offered your opponent the cut, your deck will go in the upper right-hand corner. Right below that, you see an area labeled Break Zone. That is, for lack of a better term for other TCG players, the discard pile. So when you discard cards from your hand to generate crystal points to pay for other things, those cards will go in the Break Zone. If a forward ends up taking more damage than or equal to damage or greater than its power, and it breaks, that's the term for dying here in FFTCG, then it would go to the break zone. Some summons may deal damage or just break a character outright. Well, then those characters, when broken, would go to the break zone. Always keep in mind characters. That is a particular term referring to forwards, backups, or monsters. Anything that's targeting a forward, a backup, or a monster specifically will say forward, backup, or monster. When you see the word character, it means everything is free game, forwards, backups, and monsters. Some effects will just resolve cards to the break zone. They don't technically break, as that term has specific meaning in Final Fantasy TCG, but they may just say a card moves to the break zone. Or in cases where you reduce the power, maybe through a summon, of a forward to 0 or less than 0, that card is considered to resolve to the break zone as a power check sees that its power is 0 or below. If you have a 5,000 power forward and you deal 5,000 damage to it, that breaks. If you have a 5,000 power forward and you cast a summon that reduces a forward's power by 5,000, that would resolve to the break zone. I know some of these are just minutia terminology, and I'm going to try to avoid too much of that here. Maybe we can circle back and do kind of like an advanced series where we get really in-depth with priority and different things. later after this series is fully updated. If you'd like to see that, throw that in the comments below. But I think it's an important one to point out that there are various reasons you might go to the break zone, and it doesn't always mean the card broke. We have the main primary playing area in the middle of the mat, and if you want to imagine this as being divided into two halves, that's pretty the best way to look at this. The half furthest from you, the top of your screen, is generally where your forwards will go when you play them, and the half closest to you, or the bottom half of the screen, is where your backups will be played. Remember, backups always enter the field dull, and forwards always enter the field undull. Upright, active is the term in Final Fantasy TCG. Trying to avoid using the Magic the Gathering T word here, I guess. They always come in active, unless card text or abilities specify otherwise, of course. Monsters don't have their own dedicated area. Generally, people tend to put them right in that middle line, but off to the right. So it's not all the way on where the forwards are. It's not all the way where the backups are. And they're not centered. They're just kind of off to the right, close to the deck and the break zone. Again, you might see people putting them in slightly different areas. On the left side of the mat, we have our damage zone. Remember, the point of the game is to deal 7 damage to your opponent. And when one forward attacks, if it's able to get through to your opponent, it deals 1 damage. It doesn't matter if it's a 1,000 power forward or a 10,000 power forward. They all deal 1 point of damage unless card text says otherwise. When you take damage, you will take the top card of your deck, turn it face up, and put it in the damage zone. Remember, if it is a card indicated with the X-Burst icon that we reviewed in video number 1, you get to resolve that effect for free. So taking damage may not always be a bad thing. Sure, it puts you closer to death, but you might end up getting a free break or a free search of a card or something because you don't have to pay the cost to actually go do what the X-Burst text says. Keep in mind that X-Bursts are always optional. Just because you pop an X-Burst when you took damage doesn't mean you necessarily have to do that ability. There are some instances in the game where maybe it's not beneficial for you. Maybe it could even be a detriment to you to execute that X-Burst. X-Bursts, no matter what they are always optional. So you have the choice of whether to resolve it or not. Now that we know the general layout of our play space, let's actually get started. And before we can start hitting turn phases, we need to talk about mulligans and deciding who goes first and any special rules that apply to going first. So first off, you want to shuffle your deck and make sure it is shuffled adequately. Don't end on a pile shuffle. That's bad form, right? You got to do a little push shuffle or riffle shuffle if you are so inclined to bend the hell out of your cards. Not my jam, but hey, if it's yours, go for it. And then always offer your opponent the chance to shuffle and or cut your deck. I always do like to have, if my opponent's going to pick it up and shuffle, that's totally fine. I always do ask, if they don't automatically do it, can you please finish that on a cut? Just to kind of avoid, maybe them spotting a bottom card or anything like that. Can you just finish that with put the deck down and do a cut? Keep it fair. To get things started, you're going to roll some dice, play some rock, paper, scissors, whatever the hell you want to do, whatever random method you want to do to decide who goes first. So if you win the die roll, maybe you were rolling high roll with 2 6-sided die, and I got a 10 and you got an 8, I get to decide whether I want to go first or second. I don't have to go first. It's totally optional, whichever way I want to go. And maybe your deck wants to go second for a reason we'll talk about in a second, but generally speaking, you want to go first. In almost all cases, you're going to want to go first. Once we've decided who's going first and second, we will each draw 5 cards from the top of our deck, and that is going to be our starting hand. Now, we do get a chance to throw this one back if it's not great. And I'm not going to get into when to mulligan and when not to. That is highly deck specific and maybe a topic for a more advanced video. Maybe you have a deck that wants to set up a few backups, and so having a hand of 5 with 0 backups in it is probably not a good way to start. Maybe you have a deck that is very dependent on one particular forward hitting the board as early as possible to do some certain things very early in the game and apply some aggressive pressure. Well, not getting that forward or a searcher to get that forward in your starting hand is probably a reason to mulligan. Things like that. The way mulligans work in Final Fantasy TCG is you take the 5 cards you drew that you don't want, and you order them any way you want, and you put them on the very bottom of your deck. And you draw 5 brand new ones. There is no lost card penalty or anything like that. It's just a fresh mulligan. However, you can only do it once. So after you put those 5 cards at the bottom of your deck and you draw 5 new ones, you are playing this hand. You are locked into it. Good, bad, indifferent. It's your starting hand. So you're set. If you're going first, you're going to draw 1 card from your deck in your first draw phase. From there on out, both players are going to draw 2. So I'll draw 1. I'll complete my turn. My opponent on their turn in their draw phase will draw 2 cards. On my subsequent turns, when I draw, I will also draw 2 cards. So you get 2 cards every turn, except if you're going first, you only get 1. And now we're ready. We know who's going first. We've got our hands. We've mulliganed. And we're all set to start. So let's go back and take a look at our actual phases and talk about each of them in a little more detail. And that's also going to lead to a little discussion about the attack step and how to attack, how to block, and all the phases, the mini kind of phases that go in there. All right, so the first phase of every turn is the active phase. Now, obviously, on your very first turn, there's not going to be anything to do in this phase. However, in subsequent turns, we absolutely will. This is where we take all of our dull characters, whether they be forwards, monsters, or backups, and we activate them. We put them in an active position, undull position, an untapped position, if you will. Everybody gets up, and we get to do certain things with them. So this will obviously allow us to start tapping those backups or dulling those backups to generate CP to pay for other things. It may activate, give us the ability to activate certain action abilities that require dulling as part of their cost. And also in combat, it's going to give us the ability to actually dull a forward and attack with it. So it's important that everybody gets up. Unlike other TCGs, this is not a phase that anybody can respond in. As the turn player, I can't trigger any abilities or summons or do anything sneaky while I'm in the active phase. My opponent, similarly, cannot do anything either. This is a non-responsive phase where I just activate all of my characters. After the active phase, we have our draw phase. So if I'm going first, I will draw 1 card in this phase. Every other turn, we will draw 2 cards. Both me and my opponent will draw 2 cards during this step. Again, just like the active phase, and like I mentioned in video number 2, the draw phase is yet another phase where there is no ability to interface with the phase. As turn player or opposing player, we cannot put summons or abilities on the stack. There is no ability to even start a stack. You can't do anything here. I know this differs from other TCGs, but it does keep these phases very clean. Activate your stuff. Draw 1 if you're going first, draw 2 if it's any other turn besides the first, and those 2 phases are totally complete, no interference from either player. After we've done active phase and draw phase, we move on to main phase 1, and this is where the meat and the potatoes of FFTCG really start to shape up. We can do an awful lot in main phase 1, and the cool part is I only have to describe this once, because main phase 1 and main phase 2, which is coming up later, are exactly the same. In these turns, in these phases, this is where you can play a character. You can ditch cards to generate CP and play a backup. And if it has an enter the field effect, more on abilities in a minute, you can go ahead and execute that. But this is also where we start seeing priority shifts and what we call the stack. Now, I'm going to do a specific video on keywords and mechanics a little later here, and in that discussion, we will go into a lot more detail about priority shifting and the stack in general. I'm just going to give some basic information, particularly when we get to combat and the next video, about how the stack operates, how you get things onto the stack and the order in which they resolve. but I know that this is a very, very important part of the game, particularly if you start playing it competitively, that you understand. Priority shifting. When can I do things? When it's not my turn. When can I do things? When it is my turn. And I'm going to touch on those here, but please understand these will not be in-depth discussions on the stack or priority. I'm just trying to get you up and running and knowing what those are so that you can expand your knowledge base as you continue to play. So if I play a character with an enter the field effect, what we call an auto ability, there is a trigger that is automatically popped. This character entered the field, and its card text says, when it enters the field, do X. That is an automatic ability or an auto ability. And on a backup, as an example, it might tell you to go search for a particular forward, or go search for a particular job card, or go search for a particular backup, or a card of a particular element. A lot of searching. It's not the only ETBs, but on backups, there are a lot of searching. So maybe you're playing an early backup to go search a key card in your deck. That ability hits what we call the stack. And this is kind of the holding pen for all abilities, summons, action abilities, any of those types of things. And it's also where we see kind of our first priority shift and a big difference from other TCGs. The act of playing a character is not something your opponent can respond to in any way. They don't get priority. If you played just a generic character, let's say an 8K forward that had no text, there was no ability, it was just an 8K body, 8,000 power body, there is no priority shift or stack there. In other games, sometimes the act of just playing a character starts a stack where your opponent can respond. That's not the case here. But if you do play a character that has an enter the field auto ability, then that would start a stack. And what the stack refers to is any summons or abilities that need to be resolved. So we play our backup, and it says to go search for a cost 4 or less forward. We don't automatically just pick up our deck and start searching. Since we've started a stack, our opponent is going to get a chance to respond to this. We can also do other things on this stack before we give our opponent that priority shift. So I can play, for example, a backup that allows me to search for a forward and then say, before your priority, cast a summon from my hand that does something else. I do have that option, but eventually my opponent is going to get a chance to respond to the things I've done before any of them start resolving. Maybe they have summons that can cancel my summon. Maybe they have something on their field that can stop me from searching. Well, of course, they need to be given the opportunity to use those types of things against me to kind of counterbalance. Now, the way the stack works is it's a first in, last out scenario. So if I play my backup that searches and then I cast a summon and my opponent doesn't want to do anything, the summon will resolve first. So whatever the summon was supposed to do, it will get its chance to do. After that's resolved, both my opponent and I get another priority window where before my search, which is still on the stack, resolves, we can add something here if we want to. You don't just let the entire stack resolve. Both players get a chance to interject after each ability resolves on the stack. And that might be a little complex at first, but if you go back after a game or two and you listen to that again, it definitely will make a lot of sense to you. It's the first in, last out. Once the stack is cleared and everything's been resolved and nobody's doing anything else, then we can continue with our main phase 1. Maybe I want to play another character. Maybe I want to cast a summon. And we can continue doing that as much as we want through main phase 1, whether that's playing characters, casting summons, using abilities, action abilities that you have to pay for on characters that are on the field. Any of those types of things can be done as much as we want in main phase 1, keeping in mind that anytime we start a stack, we're opening up the window for our opponent to get a chance to do something on that stack and respond. This is exactly the same in main phase 2. So if you understand main phase 1, you understand like 80% of how to play the game. Really, you just need to get down combat, which ironically is where we're going to head next. But I do want to put one little disclaimer here. I said that things open up priority windows when action abilities, auto abilities, or summons enter the stack. There is one exception to this rule, and that is when you take damage and it's an X-Burst. An X-Burst cannot be responded to by other players, including yourself. You can't see that this X-Burst has popped. You took damage and this X-Burst popped to allow you to go search for something. You can't put a summon on top of that before you search. That X-Burst gets to resolve in its own clean stack. Now it may trigger auto abilities elsewhere on your field, and those abilities will still go off, but they have to wait until the X-Burst is finished resolving first. They don't get to interfere with that. So if your opponent had something on field that says, when your opponent searches, draw a card, my X-Burst that allows me to search, I can still go do that. My opponent is still going to be able to get that card. They just have to wait until the X-Burst is completed and resolved. That does make a big difference in a lot of scenarios where something has to be on field to see something happen, but maybe an X-Burst took it off field and you can't respond. And there are scenarios where that is definitely going to matter. Just always remember as a newer player that 1, X-Bursts are optional. You don't have to trigger them if you don't want to. 2, they will trigger any auto ability on field that the X-Burst meets the requirements of. And 3, the X-Burst gets to resolve totally and completely before any of those auto abilities that were triggered by the X-Burst would then subsequently resolve on a typical stack that can be responded to by both players. I know it's a little complex. You'll get it. Trust me. All right, now we are in our attack step. We have gone through our active phase, our draw phase, and our main phase 1. After our attack step, we'll have a main phase 2, which is the exact same as main phase 1, so there's no additional review there. But we've got to go to combat, or the attack phase, in between those main phases. So this is the entire window that you get to attack. You cannot bounce phases. You cannot play a character, then go attack with something, then play another character and go attack with something else. That's not the way this game works. Main phase 1, do your stuff. Attack phase, do your punching of the faces. Main phase 2, do your stuff. And then you go to end phase. So I'm going to have the attacks thing from the initial starter rules that come with a starter deck here, but I'm going to take those away in just a moment, and we'll be using the cards again here just to better show you what's going on. But there are kind of a few mini steps is a nice way to think about it in the attack phase. There's the attack preparation step. You haven't really declared any attacks yet, but this is a window for you to maybe use action abilities or use summons, and then your opponent to do the same. So there's a little step, a little priority shift between you and your opponent before you even select a forward to attack with. After we both decide we don't want to do anything there, then we kind of move to the attack declaration step. And this is where I actually decide what forward I want to attack with. Again, differing from other TCGs, Final Fantasy requires that you attack with a singular forward at a time. You don't declare an entire board of attacks, and then your opponent decides what to do with each of those attacking forwards. No, this is a one-at-a-time thing. There's a slight caveat to that rule with party attacks, which we'll get into in just a second. To make an attack, generally, you will just take the forward you are attacking with, and you will dull it, indicating that it's attacking. Brave might allow you to attack without dulling. Think of that as vigilance for you Magic the Gathering players. And again, see the keywords video once that's up if you need a reminder of all the different keywords. Just remember that another keyword does come into play here. Forwards cannot attack the turn they come in unless they have the keyword haste. Then that does give them the ability to attack the turn that they are played. Pretty similar to other TCGs on that one. Generally speaking, I will dull a forward and declare an attack. Now, my opponent does get another priority shift in here. Maybe I want to cast a summon on top of me swinging and start a stack. and my opponent can interact with that stack, just as we've talked about in main phase 1. Maybe I don't want to do anything on the attack, but before my opponent starts declaring blockers, they want to do something. There is a window of priority in each of these kind of mini steps. Assuming there's no stack, or if there was, one is fully resolved and there is still a dull forward on the board that is attacking, then we would move to the block declaration step. And this is where my opponent decides, do I want to take the damage or do I want to block? It's entirely up to them. You have no say in it. You cannot attack a particular forward. You cannot attack your opponent. You are always attacking your opponent, period. They are the ones that decide, do I let that attack hit me and take damage, revealing the top card of my deck and putting it in the damage zone, or do I want to block? Any forward that your opponent controls that is active can block. Dull forwards cannot block. Active forwards can, unless text says otherwise. And yes, there are a few forwards in the game that can't attack or block as part of their ability text. But generally speaking, any active forward your opponent controls could be used as a blocker. And once they declare a block, no matter what happens from here on out, that attack is considered blocked. There is nothing that can change this that is going to all of a sudden make your opponent take damage. If you have opted to allow them to block, you've made it to block declaration step, they've declared a block. Even if you cast a summon right now on top of that block declaration and break them, this is blocked. This attack is blocked. You'll still keep your forward because damage resolution might be changed by certain summons, but they will not take damage if all of a sudden you remove this forward. So if you want to ensure they take damage, remove the blockers before you give them a chance to block with them. After we've had a priority shift here, after the block declaration, we move to the damage resolution step. Now, if they don't have anything to block with, or they decide not to block, this is really easy. They take the damage and flip the top card of their deck. And if it's an X-Burst, good for them. And if it's not, they took a point of damage and they lost a card from their deck, which does get us a little closer to mill, right? Remember, you can win this game if your opponent has to draw and can't, and that includes drawing to take damage. So don't forget that. If we have an attacker and a blocker in the damage resolution step, we got to do a little math, and it's not hard, right? We're just dealing with two numbers here, and maybe some keywords and abilities and summons could impact and change those numbers, but generally speaking, the math doesn't usually get overly complex for two people to sit there and figure out in a congenial manner. Keeping it easy, if I'm attacking with an 8k power forward that doesn't have first strike or any special abilities, and you are blocking with an 8k forward, then these two forwards will trade in the damage resolution step. Both of them deal damage simultaneously because neither has first strike, and they deal 8,000 damage to each other. That is enough to kill them. Their power was only 8,000. So both of these forwards would break and go to their respective break zones. If the numbers don't match, then you might have a forward that survives this encounter, but has a little bit of damage stuck to them for a little while. Maybe I attacked with a 5,000 power forward, and you blocked with an 8,000 power forward. Maybe I've got a sneaky trick up my sleeve for later in the turn, and I'm kind of okay with losing this forward. I swing with my 5k forward, you block with your 8k forward. None of us has any responses to any of these additional windows in the attack phase, so we go to damage resolution. My forward deals yours 5,000 damage, but you have 8,000 power, so you still survive this. Your forward at the same time deals my forward 8,000 damage. My guy's only 5,000, so this breaks him, and mine goes to the break zone. However, it is important to remember that your forward did take 5,000 damage this turn, so it is a little susceptible to being knocked off the board. But if this forward that still survived should block again this turn, it's important to remember that just because it took damage doesn't mean it has less than 8,000 power. This forward still hits for 8,000. So even if it blocks multiple times, as long as nothing changes its power level, it will strike with 8,000 power. It may have taken 5,000 damage and only needs to take 3,000 more damage before it breaks, but every time it's fighting with another forward, it's still going to deal 8,000. It doesn't deal less damage just because it took some damage. Important to remember when you're doing your funky, fun math sometimes. Generally speaking, that's the entire attack phase. Now, again, there are some caveats with keywords like brave, which means your forwards don't have to dull to attack. Haste, which allows them to attack the turn that they come in. First strike is one we should touch on just a little bit. That actually impacts the damage resolution step here, which means if my forward has first strike, instead of the blocking and attacking forwards dealing damage simultaneously to each other, the forward with first strike gets to deal damage first. And then, and only then, if that forward is still alive, will it deal its damage in return. So if two 7,000 power forwards collide in combat and one of them has first strike, the first strike forward deals its 7,000 damage alone. That's enough to kill the blocking 7,000 power forward or break it, and thus there is no damage to come back at the first striking forward. So my 7K with first strike got to swing, broke your forward, and didn't take any damage. Other keywords can impact combat, but not usually as drastically as haste, first strike, and brave, so we'll reserve those for the keywords video later in the series. The last little caveat I want to put on combat is something I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion about this phase, and that is there is an exception to one forward attacks one at a time. You can do what's called party attacking, and this is generally used for getting over big blocking forwards. What you can do is you can have forwards of like elements team up. So if my opponent has an 8,000 power forward and I've just got two 5,000 power forwards, but they're both ice, obviously I could swing both of those individually, and as long as my opponent blocks both times, I will break their forward, but I'll lose two forwards in the process because they'll both get crunched with 8K when the block happens. I can opt to have my two ice forwards party attack and attack as a singular unit. Now again, first strike and things like this change the math, and abilities don't always carry over into parties because everybody in the party needs to have the ability for the party to have that ability, right? You can't, if one ice forward has haste, but the other one doesn't, and I've played them both this turn, I can't party them. The party wouldn't have haste. So keywords do need to be shared across the party if you intend to use those. But in an open combat situation, I could swing these two ice forwards as a party, and essentially what is happening is a 10,000 power forward is now attacking. If my opponent blocks this with his 8,000 power forward, his forward will break when we get to the damage resolution step, barring no interactions by other players, which we always knew that was going to be the case. However, I'm still going to get to keep one of my forwards because the blocking player does get to determine how much damage goes to which of my forwards. But he only has 8,000 damage to pass out, and I have two 5,000 power forwards. So hitting one of those with 5,000 power will break it, but then that means he can only hit the other with 3,000 power. So I'll get to keep that forward with a little bit of damage on it until the end of turn, and I will lose one and I'll take out his blocker. So it might be a nice way to get up over bigger targets. And there also are abilities in FFTCG that are actually triggered by party attacks. So it may be beneficial for you in other ways to party attack. You are not limited by the number of forwards that you can put in a party. They just have to be legally able to party together. 2 earth forwards, thumbs up. You can party attack with them. 5 earth forwards, thumbs up. You can party attack with them. And when we talk about multi-element forwards that we introduced in video number 2, those forwards are considered either or, not just in party attack situations, but also in searching situations. Searching for a fire forward could go get you a fire wind forward like the Zidane we used in our previous video. Zidane being fire and wind could also party with another fire forward, or with another wind forward. But you can't link through on Zidane. Don't try to daisy chain. You can't have a wind forward and a fire forward and Zidane make a triple party. No, 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 no. If you want Zidane to be in a fire party, any other forwards in that party would also need to be fire. Now that we're basically through combat, we only have 2 phases left. Main phase 2, which is the exact same as main phase 1. We can go back to playing characters, casting summons, playing with abilities on the field, whatever we want to do. Or casting from our limit break deck, right? That's something you could do in main phase 1, so you could do it from main phase 2 as well. Cool. All of that stuff applies. So there's no additional explanation needed for main phase 2. It's the exact same as main phase 1 with all the typical priority shifts between both players and the ability to start or resolve a stack. Then we have our end phase, and this is easy, right? It's the end of our turn. Usually, there's not a lot going on here. It is one of those non-interactable phases. I can't cast a summon in my end phase, and my opponent can't do anything either. However, there may be auto abilities or summons that are lingering on your board that trigger something to happen at the end of the turn. Those auto abilities would go off, and you would get to resolve them. You just can't put anything else on the stack. So at the end of your turn, draw a card. You could not put a summon on top of that before you draw. You just draw your card. Your opponent gets to do the same thing. Any auto abilities they have triggered by my ending of turn, they'll go off, but you can't add additional things to the stack as those resolve. It's just a chain of autos that go off. This is also the phase where summons that last until the end of the turn will drop off, and any damage your forwards have received in combat will drop off as well. It's not carried from turn to turn. So an 8,000 power forward in our example that took 5,000 damage would now be healed back up for to 8,000 power, and no damage on him. So yeah, all that stuff falls off. So really learn your main phase 1 and combat. The rest of this is easy mode. You can't even interact with it. You just do what the damn phase says. Once I've completed my end phase, it is my opponent's turn. I do want to point out one thing here. In early games in particular, it might be really tempting to just play out a backup on your first turn in your main phase 1. Maybe it searches you a card, and then you say pass to your opponent. That's a pretty common turn 1 in many games of FFTCG. But I do want to point out that that doesn't mean the other phases didn't happen. Remember, at the end of each phase, as you go into the next phase, there is a priority shift. I could say I want to go to the attack phase, and my opponent can say, hold on, I would like to do something while it is still your main 1 phase, and keep me in my main 1. After they've done whatever they want to do, I'm still in main 1. So if I decide, you know what, based on what you did, I'm not ready for combat, that's fine. I'm still in my main 1. But there is that checking with your opponent to move to every phase. And while generally speaking in a tournament game, the players know enough to tell you, hold on, you may want to take it slower your first few times through the game, particularly if you're learning with somebody else that's new. Just because you play a backup in main 1 and go search and you say pass, doesn't mean your attack phase didn't happen or your main phase 2 didn't happen. They did. And if your opponent wanted to stop you before you left any of those phases, they certainly have the right to do so. Once whatever they've done is resolved, you are still in whatever phase they kept you in, though. You don't automatically move. You will get a chance to do things in that phase. So it's important to note that. Again, one of those more competitive nature things in a friendly game, it's likely not going to matter too much, but important to know that those phases weren't skipped. They did still happen. All right, we spend a lot of time here, so let's get this video under wraps. This is definitely, usually, it was on the first time, it's going to be this time, the longest video of the series because there's quite a bit to go over. Really, from here, all we've got to cover is some keywords and mechanics in a video, and then we'll talk about some mop-up details and get a sample game going where my son and I actually talk through our turns and how we're spending and how we're paying and what abilities and when we're responding so that you can kind of see it in action. We usually don't play a full game. We go a couple of turns so that you get the idea, just so you can see it in action. We could spend some time in a future video series getting in more detailed and maybe more competitively oriented. I did some videos on my personal channel years ago about competitive play and rulings and things like that. If you want to see that, let me know. But before we part ways today, I did want to touch on just one thing we've mentioned in previous videos. And now that we have talked about how we set up the game, how we go through the turn phases, and how we play, I think it's important to come back to this. And I want to list out for you the private and public zones now that we know where everything is on the field. If you look at the play mat here, we never really talked about where our limit break deck goes. It kind of just goes off to the side. Legitimately off to the side of your mat. There's no place on your mat for it, so people just kind of put it on the table to the left of their mat or to the right of their mat. There also isn't an area marked for removed from game, which some forwards or characters can be removed from game. Some cards might be removed from game as part of payment. That means they don't go to your break zone. You could not use summons to take something out of your break zone and recur them. They are removed from game. Both players have the exact same setup here. Your deck is obviously a private zone. Your opponent cannot just pick up your deck and start looking through it. However, it's also private to you. While you may have some control over placing cards in certain spots at certain times due to card abilities, you cannot just pick up your deck and look through it either. It is a private zone from both players. When you're searching, obviously that's different. An ability that allows you to pick up the deck, search, find a card, show it to your opponent, shuffle your deck, have them cut, put it back. Yeah, you're allowed to do that. So your deck is private. Your break zone is public. You are allowed to look through your break zone at any time you want, and so is your opponent. Your removed from game zone is public. You are allowed to look at that at any time, and so is your opponent, unless card text says otherwise. There is one very odd particular example that I'm thinking of where cards removed from game are not visible to one or both players. So unless card text says otherwise, removed from game is a public zone. Your damage zone is public. You can look at it at any time. It's sitting on your mat face up to begin with, but if your opponent, wanted to move a card or two just so they could see exactly what was there, they are absolutely free to do that. Your hand is a private zone unless a card exposes that. And then even after it's exposed to your opponent and you hide it again, it has now become a private zone again. So your hand is private. Your limit break is kind of funny in that the face down cards in your limit break, the ones you have not used to play or pay for limit break cards yet, they're private. You can pick them up and look at them at any time, but your opponent cannot. However, the face-up portion of your limit break deck, any limit break cards you have played that have since left the field or that you have turned face-up as part of cost to play other limit break cards, your opponent is able to see those. That is a public zone. So you can peek at the face-down anytime you want. Your opponent can't, but the face-up portion, if any of your limit break deck, is considered a public zone. Just so you know what you can pick up and look through or ask to look through and what you can't. That's going to do it for this long-ass video. I hope it got you everything you need. We're in mop-up mode now. You have enough that you could sit down and play tonight and come back with some questions tomorrow. Maybe all you would have to do is look up a couple of keywords or some of the mechanics like warp or counters or crystals or things like that because we haven't talked about those yet. Well, that'll be the next video where we kind of just give the rundown. But haste, first strike, brave, action abilities, you got it. Friends, get down to that table tonight, shuffle up, get playing, have some fun, and then hopefully Friday, it's my daughter's graduation party this weekend, so I don't know. I hope to have the next video up by the end of the week, maybe into the weekend. At the worst case scenario, early next week. But hopefully it'll be a lot sooner than that. I hope you're enjoying this series. Stick with us. We're almost done. Stay safe. We'll see you at the next Final Fantasy TCG event. Later.